I just got done with this killer workout that I fueled properly. How quickly do I need to recover with or get some protein in to replenish and recover what I just broke down?
You should actually have an IV ready for you immediately. Actually, if you're or on your last set of your exercise, you should have IV protein going right into your vein as soon as you rack it. That's how quickly you got to have the protein in.
Right. Okay. So like a 30-second anabolic window, or I
Yes.
just like completely lost everything.
Why did you even work out?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I thought. You know,
So
I'll keep my nursing friends on standby then to have some IVs
yeah.
ready for my next workout. I don't know how much that's going to end up costing me, but whatever it
So
takes.
maybe, yeah, you're probably, I think you see and communicate more with kind of the general resistance training population. So here we go. We can get way more into the resistance training with our protein. Is what do you kind of hear as is that still kind of the practice from most people?
The whole anabolic window thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I hear that still working in a gym and whatnot. Being around that, you hear it more often than you think you would, because I've got the privilege of being a part of the academic community and then part of the pro community in a gym
Yep.
concurrently, and the academia side of me knows it is a little bit more ahead of the curve, because it takes time for the research to get out, and so I'm just like, we're past that. But then I realized that Gen Pop is not past that. They haven't, the research hasn't gotten to them yet. So I will hear people or just ask me like, hey, like, do I need to like have this protein? Like, how quick after my workout do I need to have this protein? Or can I wait to have it like after my meal when I get home? Because I just feel like I'm getting like too bloated. I've got clients telling me this, like, hey, like I'm trying to get I know I'm supposed to get my protein in like right after my workout, and then I'm going home and eating. I just can't eat my meal. But well, I never told you you had to like slam your protein shake
Yep.
right before you have your normal meal. Like, it's fine. So basically, what I'm getting to is that there is a kind of a bell curve here, or a curve here that you're
Sure.
looking at. So like, sure, great. If you can do a protein shake within an hour of a workout, you'll probably see slightly more, a 0.0001% of a difference of improved results. But if you have this protein an hour later, 2 hours later, it's not going to make much of a difference. It's more of a over the course of the day kind of thing, is what the literature started to transition to. Am I getting the proper protein intake for my training in, for my recovery in, over the course of that 24-hour period? Because then we basically resetting overnight after refasting. So like, great. If you can get it then after your workout, fantastic. But like, don't compromise your ability to eat your actual meal, your actual dinner meal that you have planned, just because like, I gotta have my protein shake or else
Yep.
I'm missing the anabolic window, and like that workout was useless. It's more of a continuum there. It's a more open-ended. Primary focus should be to consume an adequate amount of protein over the course of the day, and you're gonna see results.
Yep.
Now there's the argument that like, oh, I'm a high level athlete or high level bodybuilder, I need that 0.001% difference.
Yep.
Maybe you could make an argument there, but for the most part, even for the highly competitive population, like, it's
Yeah.
not gonna matter.
No, I would probably agree with that. And so I think I'm so if I turn my head, it's because you say things and I'm like, okay, there's some keywords in there that are so important to get into. And so you had just said it, so I'll keep it on in that kind of in that framework, is the percent difference you get from following certain strategies. The carbohydrate's different because we're talking about fuel, right? So like your performance can increase considerably. So like you get a lot of percent difference depending on how well you're fueled, right? For performance, or for performance purposes, we're talking about things like muscle protein synthesis. we're talking about way smaller differences based on, when you eat your protein, or yeah, when you eat your protein relative to your workout. Again, trying to keep it with nutrient timing here. And for most people, almost everybody, right? Even if you were to see a study that did, post-workout protein shake, let's say, just keep it with just shakes here because it's easy, 30 minutes, hour, 2 hours, right? You may see, let's say a 5% difference. Let's say you see a 5% difference between 30 minutes and maybe 2 hours, probably isn't even that much. Let's say 3 hours, right? 3 hours, because you can still have some, or 3 hours is really pushing it, but you can still have some benefits from having the protein within the 3 hours post-workout. That depends on when you had your protein before you worked out, of course, which is another big thing to consider. But if there's a 5% difference between those values, 5% may matter to some really, really high level people. So when you're recommending things as a regular individual, consider what level of competition they're at, right? Are you putting more burden on somebody who really doesn't, it's not going to make a difference about that 5%, to have them, make sure that they have their protein shake with them at all times, ready to go. Maybe their gym is far away and they're stressed out because they're not going to, meet the recommendations that you gave them, for just a small negligent difference between 30 minutes to an hour, or 30 minutes to even, 2 to 3 hours, let's say. But for your really high level bodybuilders, who basically we're talking about, you see your high level bodybuilders, how much difference is there on, okay, let me backtrack. You can see some differences, but let's say between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, we're talking about microscopic
Right.
differences. Yeah. We're talking within 5% differences, if not smaller. So in that scenario, that kind of stuff matters. And even for, not the Mr. Olympia type bodybuilders, right? On almost, I would say you would probably, I don't know, maybe not. Tell me how many people you think are within probably 1 to 5% difference from each other on the end of the stage for like any classification, any category.
It can range. So like the more competitive guys are obviously that window is much tighter.
Yeah. How many people do you think fall within that? Do you think, how many people are you competing with that are within 5% of each other? Or is it pretty obvious?
It's like, I'm thinking back to my show this past weekend. The top 3 or 4 guys, like in my class, pretty close. Pretty close. Yeah. There's not like a huge clear difference. That's where it comes into the more subjectiveness of the sport. But as you spread it out, top 10, now there's a 10% difference between 1 and 9 or 1 and 10, so.
Right, exactly. So I think, again, it goes back to, okay, we're talking about nutrient timing, again, because we get off on our tangents there, but, we're talking about nutrient timing. It really comes down to, okay, what's the kind of difference between doing it at our time point A versus time point B relative to what it is your actual goal is. If it's just for general muscle gain, it probably doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you're conscious and getting it in within a decent amount of time after your workout, ideally within 2 hours, depending on how far away your last protein consuming or protein meal was, right? But, if you're a high level athlete where those percents matter and maybe those percents accumulate, right, then, you should probably be more, not even high level, but if you're up there trying to do something for competition, maybe be more mindful of that. So I think the next thing is that I was going to talk to you about, as you said it, and I think it is so true, on how important it is maybe as researchers to not just write off trends so quickly, because like you said, you have people in your practice, or the people that you're training and stuff, that are like still following these things that we've been like, that doesn't matter, right? We're kind of, I wouldn't say ahead of other people, but we're in it as far as studying it, and we're getting information from scholars and from people who are doing these things on a regular basis, right, with class or with reading and writing and everything. And so we kind of seem to be at that marker, but most people are really not at that marker. We actually noticed that in our endurance athlete survey, which again, I'll just let you know, we're kind of on the last leg of that. That's hopefully going to go out soon. But it's kind of the same thing as like, oh man, I was talking to even my own director here about some of the ketogenic stuff we do, or I was talking to another colleague that we just hired, and kind of they don't say it, but it's like oh yeah, keto's kind of like, it was a great source of research and stuff like that for people about 2-3 years ago. And I'm like, no, you should see what our surveys say, or you should see what some of our information that we have say about how popular some of these things really are. So I guess, again, to kind of reiterate that, oh yeah, we may write it off, and you may see research stop coming out about it, but it will resurge because things are still going on.
Right.
That is a fact.
That's why people are like us are here, Austin, right? We're trying to bridge the gap. We are graciously laying down, our time and effort for all you people out there, is the gracious, Jim Bros / academians we are, to try to bridge that gap between, what's happening in the literature and the research and what's been spewing around at your, local gym. Try to catch everybody up a little bit, because that's what really matters.
Yeah, man, and even within that, thinking about just different practices that I see, I think, a lot of times, we'll do it, I think, because, we're, trying to do our best to think about it from a scientific perspective, which is always, should kind of be the priority. But of course, we always want to kind of go into not just and you do this really well in your videos, it's not just what's going on in science, but there's some practical application that you really want to. So we talked about carbohydrates, right? It depends, like how hard are you working? What was your glycogen store? What did your glycogen stores look like prior to? Right? Lots of things to kind of consider and then apply, in a certain way, or even with the carbohydrates, make sure you eat them before, because, generally you're not eating enough. If you're working out at a high level for a given day, you can run into some really bad energy availability issues, which is energy availability just meaning not having enough calories to support basic metabolic functions, right? After you account for exercise, right? So bad things can happen when you don't have that. So you need to eat more, right? To make sure that you're getting that. So again, contextual. But with things like protein and then consuming it too quickly afterwards, and I don't know if there's a word for, or too quickly is the right word, but we don't want to demonize it for people who maybe aren't doing it because of some unbacked or unscientific backed reason, right? So like the protein, the anabolic window, like if you're doing it because of that, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because, let's say, it helps you improve your satiety, right? And you're trying to be in a caloric deficit, and you do tend to eat a little bit more in the evenings or something like that, and you work out in the evening, and so you can go, you can use it maybe to help you with that, because protein is incredibly satiating, is incredibly satiating. Or maybe you do have a longer drive home, right? Let's say from the gym, or maybe you plan on hanging out somewhere afterwards, right? Or not being able to have access to the nutrients within a decent time range, but you still want to get some, higher muscle protein synthesis than if you were to consume protein 4 hours after, right? So there's that context, like, hey, I don't want to hate on you for doing it, but just make sure that you're not doing it for a reason that's not going to really provide you with any like added benefit, right? For sure. Now, what about intra-workout protein?
Intra-workout protein. So that's going to be a little harder to find in the literature because, well, one, like you just said it, protein is very satiating, very filling, and sometimes that's not the best feeling to have on the stomach mid-workout. I think I'll try to link the study in the notes of the show, but there's only been maybe one or two that I can think of off the top of my head that have even looked at intra-workout protein, and from what I remember, it's like there was no difference between the intra group and intra and post, or just post. I can't remember what were the uh, what they're actually doing there, but yeah, from what I can recall off the top of my head, I don't think there was much of a difference that they found.
Yeah, no, yeah, I would probably concur with that. Is that there's really not a lot to, and we'll get into another thing with the intra workout stuff, but in just a second. But I'll also say that again, there's not too much difference. I do see it's still practiced to some degree in the like real world. I think maybe you would probably agree that it's not going to be, you know, like a 50% of the gym is consuming protein or mid workout, but you probably see, you know, two people maybe in there, two, three people kind of every time that you go in, maybe doing it.
There is a IFBB men's physique pro that works out of my gym that will have an entire like high protein meal
Yeah.
in the middle of his like 3 hour workout because he's just like hanging around talking half the time. But
Yeah.
you know,
Sure. That's different, but yeah.
it's just you know, it just came to my mind. I was like, yeah, well, here's this high level
Yeah.
high level person having a high protein meal in the middle of their workout. Look at him, he's huge. Now,
Yep.
are there some other factors to account for there? Yes. Is his sport supplementation optimal? Yes, it is.
Yes.
You know, but it's just like, well, here's this anecdotal evidence. It's like, God, this guy's huge.
Yeah, dude. You gotta get the yeah.
Maybe he's onto something, you know?
Got to get the vitamin S in, you know. But anyways, yeah. So I think with that, right? Like, you know, you'll see people doing it. So there are people that are kind of regularly doing it. So every time if I go in the gym, I see two, three people doing it. There's a circulating amount of people in the gym, you know, a decent proportion of people in the gym that will, you know, practice that. Number one is if it really doesn't offer you any extra added benefits. Now for this IFBB pro guy, he's trying to do whatever he can to kind of move to the next level. So for him, it might be worth it if it makes any difference, kind of that thing on, hey, a 1% difference for me. If it gives me that, I'll take it. Even if it does, it does. Hey, I don't want to or say anything to you. You do you, man. You're making that decision now. I will say you wouldn't probably want to you want to start halting with the kind of intra workout protein for maybe a cost effectiveness, because protein is expensive and it's going to keep getting more expensive every single year. And so I would, if it's not giving you any added benefit and you can actually save money and then use that at the optimal times, again, kind of within that 2 hour window after, rather than trying to use it intra, then that's probably the best way to go for sure. So definitely something to think about is the cost of protein. Now, what you'll probably see more often, rather than actual proteins, let's like a milk-based whey protein or something like that, is amino acids. So what do you think about intra-workout amino acids? Maybe there's one supplement because it's some semi kind of together with protein, of course, BCAAs or EAAs or essential amino acids. So essential amino acids, just before you go, Garrett, is basically when it says essential, it means that the body doesn't synthesize it on its own. So you have to receive it from diet. And so people will consume the EAAs kind of as what I would think some in the real world are using as an analog to protein, right? In a way to improve muscle protein synthesis, right? Now, I'll let you kind of go on your thought or what you see with that and kind of what you think with the EAAs or BCAAs. Maybe let's go BCAAs and then EAAs, maybe.
Right. So again, this is kind of coming to the whole like disconnect between the academia and the bro science stuff. In my mind, like, oh, like we stopped caring about intra workout BCAAs a long time ago, but I see people still, you know, obviously there's still a market for those and people are still doing this. I have clients that are like, hey, like, when should I take my BCAAs? And like, that wasn't on the list of things that I told you to take, but whatever, sure. So BCAAs or EAAs, whatever, the goal there with consuming those is to, you know, try to eliminate any kind of tissue loss, muscle loss during a workout, um, optimize your chance for growth afterwards, without consuming actual food or protein that might be heavier on the stomach. Um, there is some data that shows, hey, if I'm going in and training fasted, that hey, it might be beneficial. You might see some benefits from this. Practical applications here, but for the majority of people that are going in, midday workouts or in the morning after breakfast, there's now a ever expanding body of literature showing that BCAAs and EAAs aren't really necessary during a workout, because caveat, as long as we're consuming adequate amounts of complete proteins from other sources.
Yes.
So if you're taking in a milk protein or whey, like, those are complete proteins. You don't need any BCAAs, because guess what those have in them?
Yeah, correct.
Those that's exactly what is in those, among other things. So if you're getting complete sources of complete proteins throughout your day, like, there's really no point in consuming BCAAs or EAAs pre or post workout, or pre or intra workout. Sorry. Like I said, minimal data saying, like, hey, if I'm training fasted, you might see some benefits there. But
Yeah, and I think, again, for if it was going to have an effect on you, let's say BCAAs, because BCAAs I think are the ones that you definitely would say, like, hey man, there's enough literature out there right now to say that you don't need to do BCAAs. But I think I'll hurt some people. I'll hurt some people's feelings here too, with how we describe things. It's always funny because you hear, and I am not as involved with bodybuilding and whatnot as I used to be. But the big thing was doing your fasted cardio with the BCAAs. It was like, I got to have my fast cardio BCAAs. Well, I'm sorry, but you're no longer training fasted after you have consumed BCAAs. I hate to break it to you. Actually, the leucine that you get from your BCAAs will actually kind of mimic the like metabolic responses of not being fasted, right? Or kind of the physiological responses of not being fasted. So no, you're not fasting anymore. But like you said, it's kind of just like evidence towards the how beneficial that is. Whatever. I probably don't have enough of it off the top of my head to probably make any good claims. So I'll say I don't know exactly, but I would imagine that it's kind of mixed, or not a lot of it out there to make definitive conclusions. Is probably the better way to say that. Now, with your EAAs, I think there's something to be said about it as far as, okay, yeah, does it increase muscle protein synthesis, but does it matter if, like you said it pretty clearly. So I'll reiterate, is just, hey, they're all part of the protein. So as long as you're getting the adequate protein in, you can probably save a lot of money and just buy the protein.
But what about the leucine trigger? What if I need to make sure I'm getting enough leucine in? I don't know if I'm getting enough in with my regular diet and supplementation.
With my regular protein, yeah, that's a big one. So then so then there's the leucine trigger, where you have to have enough leucine in order to initiate the muscle protein synthesis. And so you will get that obviously out of your regular protein consumption. And you don't need the extra leucine by itself because you read that there's a leucine trigger somewhere, and you don't need to incorporate the BCAAs. So yeah, I love that one. So I'm coming back into all of these things I used to hear. So it's kind of funny with that. But yeah, intraprotein, stuff like that, definitely don't need it. Now, what do you recommend for amount of protein? So when we talked about carbohydrates, we were pretty big on, oh man, you got to, there's that 5 to 12 grams per kg. What about protein?
Right. So it's funny to have seen like the kind of like literature progress over time on this. At first it was like, hey, like you need to consume pretty solid, pretty high amounts post workout. Like, get 2 scoops protein in, there's your 50 grams,
I'm guilty still of doing my 2 scoops, man. I'll admit it. But
now I only do my 1 scoop, 25-ish grams, sometimes, ranges on the protein. Because I want that one, like, we can have a whole discussion of like, if it's, I slam 75 grams of protein, in my protein powder. Oh, your body can only process blah, 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 blah amounts of protein in a given amount of time. Okay. It absorbs all of it and processes all of it. It's just, how is it being utilized,
Yeah.
So I think you don't want to ever overload this. You want to be able to get your best bang for your buck, which is a good way to put it. So I think for the most people, anywhere from 20 to 40 grams post workout is a solid recommendation.
Yep.
I think that's been pretty standardized throughout the literature. If you go over that, like if you're going 50 or 60, like whatever, like great, your body's still going to absorb it. You're still going to use that for other bodily processes. Maybe not direct rebuilding of the muscle tissue that you just broke down, but guess what? Protein's used for a lot of other stuff in the body. Like it's going to get used for other bodily processes that you needed anyways, that it was going to take from anyways. So personally, I like to do like my 25 to 30 grams because I like to save my protein because I have a very specific macronutrient, programming right now. I like to save my protein for actual food,
Yep.
something a little more that's going to sit heavier in the stomach.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely agree with pretty much everything you said. So I prefer actually to use, like I do actually the same thing typically, unless I just know that I'm not going to be able to eat, or maybe I haven't missed a meal or missed food that I'd be able to eat.
Right.
Then I'll probably do a double scoop of something just because I'm like, hey man, I need to be a little more full. This needs to last me a little bit longer. And obviously some of the satiety that you're going to get comes from a direct relationship with how much protein you consume. So you can be more satiated than more protein if that's kind of your MO. Now, I would agree 100% that the 20 to 40 grams, let's say post workout, is 100% fine. Now, unless you're a very large individual and you need a lot of protein, because you can, if we don't break it down from the perspective of after, but we do it by the kgs, right? So again, talk about carbohydrates. Let's say you're doing intra, you need 30 to 60 grams of that. If you're doing kind of that, like I said, long duration endurance exercise, if you're doing the resistance training afterwards, 20 to 40 grams would be great. But it should still fit within the general guidelines of 0.8 grams per kg at the lowest. And then there's actually been some studies out to say like, hey man, 3 grams per kg.
I've seen some of that data is like 3 plus per kg. I'm like, okay, go nuts, man.
Yeah, it's expensive, but I mean, it's pretty, it seems relative. I won't say clear, maybe I'll say it right now. It seems clear that there's some benefits, right, to ingesting up to that. And, I think you kind of see a wave with how people are kind of consuming post-workout protein or just protein consumption in general, where you kind of have like this really high protein intake. I mean, you go back to like the Arnold Schwarzenegger days where they're just eating like raw meat at every meal or something like that, like as much protein as they consume. Well, then all of a sudden there was this trend, and I don't know where you were during the trend, where it was like too much protein is bad for you, right? It's going to cause kidney damage and liver damage, not liver, but kidney damage is going to like happen, and all this bad stuff is going to happen. And so people were kind of coming up with those weird suggestions of, hey, you don't absorb the protein. This protein's terrible for you, right? You shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And it got like to this protein evil kind of thing. And so then it went back down, and then we, kind of the researcher said, hold on a minute, right? Let's actually kind of like, where do we get all this from? Find out that the data is really terrible for protein being bad for your kidneys as long as you're a healthy person, right? And you don't suffer from any comorbidities or like pre-existing kidney issues or other kind of metabolic issues, let's say. And now we come back up to where we're like 5 grams of protein is totally fine. And I think that's a good place for it to stay. I don't see any reason why not, so long as you're healthy. And how much protein that you're taking in after you work out should fit within kind of that guideline too, right? Kind of your total protein consumption for the day. Like make sure that you're planning it out to have 20 to 40 grams, right? Post workout within kind of that 2-hour window for sure. So that might be the anabolic window, but again, it varies, right? Varies for sure. Now then, how do you feel, I guess, about casein protein at night? So that's kind of that's a nutrient timing.
Yes, it is. So how much protein should I have at the end of the day before bed? I think there has been enough literature out there now to confidently say that having casein or having some kind of protein source right before bed is going to be more beneficial than not. Um, I would, I always recommend my clients, I took on the list of like things, like when we initially start up, like
Mhm.
things to buy, away, a casein is usually both on there,
Yep.
along with some other things, because I think it's incredibly important to sustain our bodies through our longest fasted period of this 20 of our 24-hour day, because we're sleeping for, I'll say we're all real healthy sleepers, for 8 hours, So yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah, go ahead. 8 hours, exactly what I get.
this is an 8 hour fast that you're having here. What do you think? What do you think? Your body just goes completely dormant? All metabolic processes stop during this time? No, you need to fuel everything, enough from just typical bodily processes, with digestion and things like that. To you're actually rebuilding the skeletal muscle that you broke down during your training and just throughout the day. Period. One of your most anabolic times of the 24-hour day is while you're asleep. MPS is up then. There's your levels of growth hormone are up then. So things are very optimal for growth and hypertrophy while you're sleeping. So having a nice casein source, again, something between 20, 30 grams, 20, 40, whatever. I usually have just take one scoop of casein. That's like 28 grams of protein right now. Relatively soon before bed.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. So I think I agree with everything you said. So I've actually seen it for before bed. So again, going back to timing. So before you go to bed, I've seen it both ways where you can get benefits from whey or from casein. Generally, casein is probably going to be the better option for you to get. I believe it is more expensive.
It is, yeah,
So
it is more expensive.
and so if you're kind of more so on a budget, you can still get decent, benefits from consuming the protein. Now, say we're talking about hypertrophy benefits, right? So muscle protein synthesis. Um, muscle protein synthesis. You can get that from either one. Casein appears to probably be better, but if you can't afford it, you can still use your traditional whey, and be fine. And the great thing about it is that you're not going to have any increased what is it? You're not going to influence lipolysis with that. So when we go back to saying, or we say lipolysis, we mean that kind of the accelerated fat loss or fat burn that you're going to go through at night, right? The protein doesn't appear to influence it too much. So that's good. That's also to say, like, hey, maybe just protein. Let's not do too much. Let's not get too crazy now before we go to bed. The protein is probably what you need to maintain that level of lipolysis or that fat loss that you're going to have at night, while still being able to influence muscle protein synthesis significantly, right? Because you want both benefits of growth hormone, which would be increased lipolysis, right? So growth hormones at night, growth hormone is great for losing fat, and it's great for increasing in size, of course, growth hormone. But make sure that you're not doing anything to inhibit all of that from it, or inhibit at least the lipolytic effects that can occur at night. Now, I think, and I don't remember exactly, don't quote me on it specifically, but there are some studies coming out now that say that even having protein before bed not only helps you with hypertrophy, but improves sleep. And so it has some sort of benefit. Now, again, I could find the study. I think Drukendrup, I can never say his name, had something on it the other day about whey specifically before bed was great for sleep, right? And so there are some added benefits to having it then. So now,
Did it.
yeah, I was going to say, so I would recommend it as well. I would say that might be for your higher, more, I don't want to say the word serious. Again, I hesitate to put people in like a box, and stuff. A box. I said that so funny. But, if you're trying to optimize the gains, have it before bed.
Right.
If you're, more on the budget and you're getting enough protein in during the day without having to do that extra at night, right? To get, again, maybe a small increase immediately, but over time, maybe it helps. Maybe you'll probably be fine without it, as long as you're getting sufficient protein otherwise up to that point. You don't have to distribute it out exactly to that point, right? If it's going to require to use more protein, then you would need to from, let's say, a shake or something like that. So definitely for that. A couple more things I think I do want to get to would be nutrient timing. Okay, we've got it, protein, how much you should have within the 2 hour window, kind of to recap. 2 hour window afterwards, make sure you kind of consume it around then. Now, again, it depends on how much you had or how long ago before that period you had protein. So you maybe need it within an hour or 30 minutes if you worked out at 6 p.m. and haven't eaten protein since noon, right? Maybe getting protein in immediately is probably your best bet, but not because of the workout anabolic window, but because you haven't had enough protein to continually have muscle protein synthesis in a very long time, right? So make sure you're spreading it out over 3 hours, every 3 hours or so, having a decent amount of protein. And if you've gone accelerated amount of time without protein relative to your workout, maybe consume it sooner, but then there's that window. Would you agree?
Yeah. So it is like, again, it comes get back to if you're getting all your protein in through over the course of the day, you're probably going to be fine. If you're looking to optimize that, then maybe look to get a little closer to the window.
Yeah.
Than that,
Yep. And so we'll get here. I was going to bring it up now, but I'll bring it up before we kind of move on. Is meal frequency, right? And so I'll kind of just describe what meal frequency is, and you can tell me. I think we kind of talked about it in the last podcast, but here's maybe a more in-depth analysis of the meal frequency, which basically just means how many or how you're distributing out your meals, basically. So if you have a predetermined amount of calories, right, in a particular diet composition, what the distribution of when you eat actually looks like. So nutrient timing being your meals, when, how far separated they are from each other within day. And there was a huge trend for a really long time. I think, it's still, I would say, probably popular today. And anyways, sorry, basically how much you're splitting up the meals. It was really popular to do that practice and to consume, these 5-6 small meals every day, right? And the idea was that you were going to kind of increase that metabolic fire, right? That you were going to just boost up your metabolism, bam, bam, bam. Like every time that you eat, your metabolism turns on. Then you stop eating, and if you're stop eating for too long, your metabolism is plummeting, and you're not getting all the metabolic advantages of eating all these different meals and whatnot. And so people were just like having these like weird, people eating 7 meals a day type of thing, and that was what was going on. We have some more evidence now, but I'll say, what do you see with that? Do you still see that practice going on, or kind of what do you see with meal frequency?
I do, and definitely within like the fitness, physique, bodybuilding community. That's still very popular, and I still use it myself. I don't have like breakfast, lunch, dinner. I have breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch number 2, snack, dinner, and then other dinner. But they're all, especially right now, relatively smaller meals, but just spread out over the course of the day. So it just like, I don't know, I think about it as muscle growth and muscle breakdown are continuous processes that occur like over the course of the entire day.
Can I stop you for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
This is in the context specifically. So I know I was like sounding like I was hating on it. So whenever we talk about you being a resistance training exerciser, it's a little bit different as far as how many meals that you should consume, because there's some different things that we'll get into after I let you finish explaining. But I want to make sure people know that as you explain it, your practice, and that you do it, that there's a different context here. So right. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So again, like you said, different context, but I don't know. I see it as since these processes are continuous through the course of the day, like there's not like an on and off switch for muscle growth and muscle breakdown. Like they don't, like we're only breaking it down when we're training, and we're only growing while we're sleeping. Both of them are continuous processes throughout the day. There's just where are we at above or below equilibrium there within those processes. So I kind of think of it as like I'm constantly wanting to fuel these processes, preferably the muscle growth one, and so keeping like like you said, the metabolic fire lit there. There's kind of something to that. So I like keeping food on my stomach personally, because I'm always trying to be on the muscle growth side as opposed to the muscle wasting side. Now I'll let you touch on this maybe for your Gen Pop everyday individual. But for like me, I always like to have something on my stomach, especially when I'm in a dieting phase, because if I'm spreading things out, then like, my God, I'm hungry and sitting here starving for 3 hours.
Yep.
I don't get to eat for, whatever it is. So for me, it's more of a psychological factor as well. Like, hey, if I'm breaking these meals up throughout the day, like I'm going to feel a little more satiated and better throughout the day. And I'm not going to be going crazy. So like the meal frequency there for me is a little bit different, but again, different purpose there.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, right before, as I interrupted you was, man, here with the meal frequency. So, I was semi narrow-minded as I was communicating about it is instead of saying, okay, this was like some weird trend that everybody's kind of doing, it's more of a, I don't want to use the word contextual, but in like, it doesn't necessarily make too much difference for most people. So once we get outside of most people, then we start to have to make some different considerations once we get outside of that. Like you said, general population, right? Similar, not similar to yourself, right? Where you're kind of outside of that. But before I continue, we're talking about meal frequency within a defined amount of calories. So let's say just a normal diet, but with a defined amount of calories for ease, let's just say 2,000 calories, right? You're eating 2,000 calorie per day diet. When we talk about meal frequency, it doesn't necessarily make too much difference how you distribute up those calories for a normal person. Right now, diet composition I'll get into in a second, because that can matter in some ways, but for the most part, it doesn't necessarily matter whether you eat 7 meals or whether you eat 3 meals, right? From a metabolic advantage, so to speak. Now, whenever you say, that you do it for things like the metabolic kind of fire kind of or argument, for the most part, yours is a little bit different because, like we kind of said, you need to spread out your protein across across a wide like time frame, let's say, right? Because by the time that you wake up, you have X amount of time to be able to get a certain amount of protein in, but that protein needs to be distributed out for X amount of time to, like you said, or similar to what you said, to make sure that you kind of always have that consistent muscle protein synthesis going on. You're, reducing or attenuating any of the excessive breakdown that wouldn't be built up, right, back by your protein intake. So yes, distributing out the protein for someone like a bodybuilder, or not big, but just resistance trainer, is definitely more important. And then what generally happens is it's not relative as much to the meal or to the meal. It's more relative to the protein for more of your resistance trainers. Resistance trainers want to make sure that they're getting that protein in that way. And then as kind of an addition to that, they just have the meal as well. Right. So they kind of have this whole thing rather than just eating one chicken breast and then a meal and then another one chicken breast and then another meal. You typically just spread out all the meals because it helps you, like you say, with satiation, right? You can feel more satisfied. You have something in your stomach, things like that. Now you get into Gen Pop, right? How much extra burden are we actually inducing on ourselves by having a bunch of extra meals that not only you have to prepare, but you have to pack, right? You have to prepare, you have to pack, you have to measure, right? You have to figure out how much is actually going into each of those things. You actually have to commit to eating all of those different things at that time, right? It's hard to spread it out. Do you really have those free hours to eat that many meals all the time, right? Where you're going to be able to stay on schedule and then not all of a sudden go from having a 250 calorie, 300 calorie meal to having an 800 calorie meal because you lost track of time and got busy, or the kids did something and got to go pick them up, whatever. So there's a lot of extra burden to eating the meals in the general population that you're not going to really like gain a lot from, right? And so with that again, to go back in the general population, metabolic fire, right? And we had kind of talked about this, is bodybuilders, the metabolic fire, whatever, it's probably most likely just to increase muscle protein synthesis, day long grow. For people who are doing things like weight loss, right, you have the what we call dietary induced thermogenesis. So basically, that's just an easy way to say that is just how many calories that you need to actually digest, store, and absorb all of the food that you eat. So it takes calories in order to do that. And so kind of the thing was back in the day, maybe not even that long ago, was that the more often that you can do that, the more it contributes to your total like energy output, right? Or the total amount of calories burnt. But the issue is that it's not necessarily about how many times you eat, right? Again, we're keeping this all in the same amount of calories, right? Whether you do 3 meals or 7 meals, is that it's actually the amount of food that you're eating that determines the metabolic spike there. So if you're going to eat a 250 calorie meal, right, and you're going to do that 7 times, or let's say, to make it easy, how about this? If you're going to do that 6 times, and now my math's not going to add up, but let's just use easy numbers, 250 calories, and you're doing that 6 times per day, and you're doing that so you can get the improved, thermogenic effects of consuming all those meals. It'd be the same thing if you had a 500 calorie meal, right? So double what the other one was 3 times a day, right? Or however, as long as the calories add up, who knows if it does or not at this point. Anyway, so to speak, it depends on the size of the meal, how you respond to that. So the bigger the meal, the bigger the actual thermogenic effect is going to be. Smaller the meal, the smaller thermogenic effect is going to be. But if they all kind of total up, right, based on based on how much you consume, whether you consume 6 meals or whether you consume 3 meals, whatever, it's about the same response overall. And it really only contributes 5 to 15% of your total expended energy per day. So you probably be better off not focusing on that. We actually don't even count for it most of the time. Whenever we're doing like dietary prescriptions, you'd probably be better off just doing 5% more exercise or eating 5% less food in general to get the same kind of benefits. Big long spiel there, but that was kind of the idea of the metabolic fire argument,
right?
From what I believe,
the generalizability isn't all there to Gen Pop is.
Yeah, for sure. And I think but then again, there's some mixed evidence, and I would argue some of the current conclusions about. So for you like you feel more satiated, right? Whenever you do the meal free or the greater meal frequency. So eating a little bit more meals, but smaller meals throughout the day. I think you're more conscious of how much protein actually exists within those meals. And so having the protein that exists within those meals is going to be incredibly satiating. So yes, let's say you do a bunch of meals and they're all really higher protein meals, similar to what a bodybuilder would do. Yeah, for sure, it can keep you satiated because the protein is going to be in there that's going to do that for you. So you're less likely to overeat, or you're at least feeling, satisfied or full to some degree without having this crazy weight gain from overeating, let's say. Whereas with people who are just eating more traditionally and not so focused maybe on protein, are not eating those higher protein meals, and therefore they're not as satiated, right? And so even if you do eat those smaller meals more consistently throughout the day, if you're Gen Pop, sometimes they don't have enough protein in them to reach that satiated state. And so then even if you ate a meal, you're like, oh man, I really don't feel like that was enough food, right? And so you're kind of fighting hunger a lot of times if the protein's not high. So if you're going to do the meal frequency that way, and you're doing it because you're trying to reduce your appetite, I would definitely recommend doing your approach and saying, hey, I need to prioritize the protein in here. That's going to help me stay satiated, because protein is going to be the most satiating macronutrient that there is. And so that goes back into the meal frequency, how it matters, because not only is protein the most satiating, but protein is the most thermogenic. And so the more protein that you're consuming, that's where you're going to see the differences in your dietary induced thermogenesis. So if we have, let's say, that 5 to 15% range, that's going to start varying, of course, by individual. But let's say if we're going to talk with just diet, let's say everybody's about similar, right? Which is fairly accurate, is that the higher protein amount within that is going to get you to a greater thermogenic effect, right? Or you're burning more calories, more protein that's in that meal, because it takes more to do all the things with protein than it does with carbohydrates, and especially fat. So fat's actually it's weird. So protein is the most satiating. Protein has the greatest thermogenic effect, so it makes you burn the most calories through digestion and absorption storage. Carbohydrates are next on thermogenesis, but then fats are next for satiety. So protein and fats, those are definitely going to be more satiating than carbohydrates. So again, I think I said it last time in our podcast, you drink a soda, you drink a Gatorade, you're definitely not full, right? But they have a greater thermogenic effect than your fat would. Fat's not very thermogenic at all. It doesn't take a lot. You have a lot of fat. I can tell you, I promise you, it doesn't take a lot to store it, right? And so those are things to consider when you think about meal frequency too, is if you're going to divide it, have some more protein, right? And if you choose not to divide it, that's okay too. But again, be mindful of protein, right? Distribute it out as you need, or as needed, to make sure you have muscle protein synthesis kind of occurring regularly. Whew. That's a lot of words coming out of my mouth.
I like it.
Yeah,
man. Said it better myself.
There's a lot of context.
It is, it's going to depend on goal to goal, population to population. So you have to frame it around what you're doing, what your specific goals are, what it is that you can do with your both time, your money, your effort, both physically and psychologically, so all this that we're saying boils down to, very individualized goals and things like that. But you have to frame this around you, so like what works for Austin and what works for me and what works for, person X, Y, or Z may not work for you, like, so you have to frame everything we're talking about with nutrient timing, macronutrient breakdowns within this timing. You need to just be, obviously there's certain facts here that are going to be standardized across all individuals because we're all humans, but a lot of stuff that is maybe out of control with like meal frequency, or more within your control with meal frequency, stuff like that. Frame it around you with your schedule, what you can do. So
yeah, for sure. And then I think the last thing, so we didn't touch on fat too much, but there's really not too much out there for basically how to time fat. I think overall with fat, and we'll have another discussion, on things related with fat, but not necessarily nutrient timing, but fat doesn't really appear to matter too much unless you start getting into maybe like, honestly, I don't know enough exactly to make a definitive conclusion on when you should consume fat. You have a lot of fat, so eventually, you're going to start using some of that stored fat, and that's fine. I don't even want to say that. Yeah.
Like the only recommendation I can make, even like surrounding nutrient timing and fat, is basically like the lack of consumption right prior to exercise, because it's such a slow macronutrient, gastric emptying rate super slow and all that good stuff. So like really like that's the only recommendation like off the top of my head that I can make concerning fat within nutrient timing, because if there is any literature that's looked at that as far as like the performance detriments or benefits with timing it throughout the day, other than just like having a high fat meal might reduce my performance right before my workout. If there's any literature on that besides that one right there, I don't know it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean, like you're definitely going to have some mechanical differences with fat. So when you talk about like digestion and whatnot, so mechanical differences being like maybe some more bloating, right, or things like that you can feel, and so it maybe decreases if you have it too early. It may affect your performance because you just feel some of the mechanical effects of having a little bit too much fat prior to workout, such as bloating. But there's really not too much out there about fat. Then the reason really is because for the most part, you're either not going to use carbohydrates at all during your workout because your workout is so short duration. Let's say like powerlifters, right? You're going to use carbohydrates. And then you pretty much have to go, 60 to 90 minutes of endurance exercise before you start tapping into fat. And, you know, by that time, I don't know if when you would have consumed fat by the time that it digests relative to whenever you're actually going to start utilizing that fat, because you're starting to run out of glycogen, right? Because then you have to assume that you have to run out of glycogen before you can start relying on fat. Well, at that point, you're just going to be basically pulling out the fat from the cell, or from the fat cells themselves, and kind of that endless of energy that you can get from having, from fat. So it's hard to time those things, to actually look at it from a research perspective, and be able to make any clinical, or any significant or some conclusions, right? That would give you an idea or provide some clarity. So I think we did almost 2 hours, man. So I think we probably tapped out that guy for a while. Yeah.
We did it. They said we couldn't do it, but we did it.
We'll find a way. I promise you I can find a way to talk for 2 hours, man.
Hey, if somebody's made it this far, then damn, kudos to you.
What I hear is that it gets broken down into multiple days.
Probably that's the process there, general process. Yeah. But yeah, so I think that pretty much covered everything that we possibly could have, without just totally derailing conversations left and right and going here and there. We'll have more specific conversations on specific stuff as we go. As always, thank you guys for tuning in.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
Couldn't do it without the listeners. So yeah, thank you guys, and we'll catch y'all on the flip side.